Large organizations and bureaucracies will come to dominate American life, and white-collar workers will outnumber blue-collar workers. Many Americans work in corporations with hierarchical structures and complicated charts showing who's responsible for who. Even if you were a blue-collar worker, you would see this in your management, perhaps, at the company where you worked, or in the union that you might belong to. And this would become a focus of criticism. William White's Organization Man in 1956 argues that self-reliance is dying out. It says bureaucracies call for conformity and teamwork, not individualism and vision. David Reisman's The Lonely Crowd in 1950 argues that the inner-directed man no longer really has a place in our society, and that to be successful, we must become other-directed. In other words, no longer should we, to be successful, do you listen to your own personal voice and follow your own vision, but now the trick to being successful is figuring out what the people around you want and doing that. An idea that we're losing our individuality. If you've never seen The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit from the 1950s, this is a wonderful example of this. And there's also quite a bit of this in the great TV show Mad Men, which is currently airing as I do this video. We see this in literature as well. Authors like Sal Bellow write books about people trying to find their place in this new modern world of conformity where kind of different thoughts and different attitudes don't really have a place. Bellow particularly deals with Jewish Americans trying to fit into the modern world. Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger's 1951 classic, tells the story of a teen who can't relate to anybody. He starts out at school and he can't relate to the people at school or his family or his friends. Eventually goes to the city just kind of desperately looking for somebody who he feels like he can relate to, and he never really does find anybody. One of probably my favorite novel of all time is Joseph Heller's Catch-22. And one of the great themes of Catch-22 is this kind of lunacy of these hierarchical structures. And Heller particularly deals with his experience as a bombardier in World War II and the military hierarchy and how that often doesn't really make much sense. It's an hilarious book, and if you've never read it, you really should. Trust me. Of course, other critics bubble up from the young, and they're called the Beats, or the Beat generation. They're young poets, artists, and writers who criticize middle-class society. Of course, mainstream society, particularly older folks, look down on them and call them beatniks. Now, putting the word "nik" in the end of something implies that it is Russian, and so this is a way of saying basically they're communists, because that was kind of the catch-all comeback or criticism of anything you didn't like back then if you were mainstream. But the Beats criticized the sterility and the conformity of mainstream culture. They rejected politics in many ways. They claimed that both parties were the same, that electing a Democrat or Republican didn't really matter one way or the other. Probably their most significant figure was Allen Ginsberg, and his most significant work is the 1955 poem Howl, where he talks about, among other things, robot apartments, invincible suburbs, skeleton treasuries, blind capitals, and demonic industries. Here's a little bit of Ginsberg reading his epic poem.
Howl for Carl Solomon. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo and the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats, floating across the tops of cities, contemplating jazz, who bared their brains to heaven under the L and saw Mohammedan angels staggering on tenement roofs, illuminated, who passed through universities with radiant, cool eyes, hallucinating Arkansas and Blake light tragedy among the scholars of war.
A long clip of Allen Ginsberg. Hope you enjoyed it. The other big name to come out of the Beat generation is going to be Jack Kerouac, who writes books like 1957's On the Road, and he shows a rootless, wandering, kind of directionless generation who can't fit in, who can't kind of make sense of the mainstream, commercial, consumerist American world. Ginsberg, Kerouac, and the other Beats were also iconoclasts. They very often like to go directly at kind of the most basic assumptions of the mainstream are its most sacred cows. And the Beats represented, in many ways, just the restlessness of youth. Now, the Beats, here's a great Jack Kerouac quote, by the way, from On the Road, which you should check out. We'll look at it in class if you're in my class. But juvenile delinquency also became a great topic of discussion. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, you can watch 1955's The Blackboard Jungle, which is a really, it's a great movie in many ways about a teacher who goes into an inner city school and he finds a bunch of apathetic, really criminal kids who treat him with a complete lack of respect. Until he, of course, wins them over in the end. Now, there was a great fear because of the way kids were dressing. They began to idolize bikers and began to be fixated with cars and wear the leather jackets and stuff. Marlon Brando became a teen icon for his roles like this one in The Wild Ones.
Hey, somebody tell me what that means. BRMC. What does it mean?
Black Rebels Motorcycle Club.
Isn't that cute? Hey, Johnny, what are you rebelling against?
What do you got?
Taste of The Wild One, kind of the original Sons of Anarchy, I guess. The truth is, though, there was not an increase in juvenile crime. It was more a concern, and the kids definitely dressed like thugs, or what would have been called thugs in the day. They talked back to their parents. There's great examples of both of these, by the way, in the great Rebel Without a Cause, starring James Dean. Cars and bikes become an obsession, and we do see an increase in sexual activity among teens. Maybe the most profound symbol of this is James Dean. James Dean was a young actor, and he's very much portrayed, comes across as a rebel. He only makes 3 films: Rebel Without a Cause in 1955, East of Eden also in 55, and Giant in 1956, all 3 of which are great, and I highly recommend you watch if you've never seen them. He tragically dies in a car crash, he's racing, in 1955 at the age of 24. And in many ways, to these kids who were kind of latching on to this new counterculture, he became a great symbol of that whole movement.